From the NewsChannel 5 network, this is Open Line.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Open Line. Glad you are with us tonight, 2 weeks away from election night. Now, of course, the election is already underway. Millions of people are voting all across the country. They're voting early, and we're seeing big turnout here in Tennessee for early voting. Tonight, we're talking about voting during a pandemic. Have you voted? How was it? That's what we want to talk about. Love to hear from you, your individual concerns, perhaps, or just how things went. But we're talking with people joining us via Zoom, as all of our guests do now, who can help address this issue from all kinds of points of view. Marian Ott is president of the Tennessee League of Women Voters. Marian, thank you for being with us.
My pleasure.
And also Don Schluckebier is Advocacy and Government Relations Director for Think Tennessee. Don, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Ben, for having me.
And all right, I'll start. Think Tennessee, Don. What is that first? Tell us quickly, what is Think Tennessee?
Sure. Think Tennessee, we're a nonpartisan, statewide, results-oriented think tank based in Nashville. We use research and advocacy to work to build a state where all Tennesseans are civically engaged and economically secure. So we use our work to, or rather our work is based on the understanding that our state's policies matter, like they do in all states, and that they have an impact on things. So we're looking at the systems and practices in place that might have an impact on strengthening civic engagement and economic opportunity.
Basically, you want as many people to vote as possible. You're nonpartisan. You just want lots of people voting. And Marion, it's the same with the League of Women Voters, right?
Oh, absolutely. We're a 100-year-old organization, and we have been encouraging people to vote for that long. And yes, we would like everybody to vote.
And nonpartisan, right?
Oh, absolutely nonpartisan.
All right, so great. All right, so let me ask, Marion, I'll start with you. What are you seeing at this point? I mean, we're seeing huge turnout. What are some concerns you have as far as voting in a pandemic? What are you seeing right now?
We're seeing, of course, a lot of absentee balloting, and as we know, the judge and the state expanded the definition. So we're one of the few states left that have what's called excuse-based absentee by mail voting. You have to have a reason to vote by mail. But now if you have underlying conditions that make you more susceptible to COVID, you're able to vote absentee by mail. So there's a lot of that. There's been some concerns. People are anxious about whether their ballot will be received because of all those stories about the mail. We want voters to know that voting by mail is safe and they can track their ballot. So that I think voters have some concern, but they shouldn't. It is a safe way to vote. But if you can't vote by mail, or you choose not to, you can vote in person. You can vote early voting, or you can vote on election day. And our state election officials have taken a lot of steps to make that as safe as possible during COVID, with the social distancing and masks and PPE and single-use kinds of things. So we think that there should be no reason for people not to vote. And if you do get to the polls and for some reason you have a problem, we encourage you to ask for a provisional ballot so that whatever the issue is, you have a few days to rectify. Maybe you forgot your ID, maybe your registration that you did at the DMV didn't make it over to the election officials, or maybe your absentee ballot didn't show up as having been received, so you showed up and voted provisional.
Right. We'll talk about provisional ballots in a moment. And Don, I want to ask you, what are you seeing? And it seems like there's huge turnout. Are you getting that sense that there is huge turnout right now for early voting?
Yeah, there's definitely sort of record-breaking turnout right now, looking at the same period of time of early voting from 2016 and 2012 presidential elections. So the Secretary of State's office released some statistics for the number of votes cast already from the first, 4 days of early voting. Early voting started last Wednesday, so Wednesday through Saturday. Looking at those numbers and also the number of absentee ballots that have been received already so far, it's over 730,000 votes, which is a 53% increase over the same time period in 2016 and an 88% increase over the same time in 2012. So definitely more voters taking advantage of absentee and the first days of early vote than we've seen in previous, the last two least elections.
That's fascinating. 53% increase. And I wonder if part of that is part of what Marion was saying, that there is this, I don't know, are you seeing that people are concerned about vote by mail? And what do you say to people? We heard what Marion said. What do you say to people who are concerned about vote by mail?
Yeah, so I think, echo everything that Marion said. I think the one sort of thing that we wanted to highlight, Think Tennessee put out an issue brief and hosted a webinar last week about voting in a pandemic and what it looks like here in Tennessee. And one of those things that we highlighted were the changes in eligibility, some of what Marion mentioned. Some people are able to vote absentee for the first time this November, where they're not typically able to. And so that's one thing. It's just making sure that everyone who is eligible knows that they're eligible or knows how to check and see if they're eligible. To Marion's point about sort of mail concerns, I think one thing that we're also highlighting is that by law in Tennessee, absentee ballots need to be returned to election commissions through the Postal Service, and it needs to be received by November 3rd, by the close of polls on Election Day. And so while the window for absentee ballot requests is open until October 27th, we're definitely encouraging, as are the League of Women Voters and everyone else out there, not to delay. If you know you're eligible and you know you're going to vote absentee, go ahead and get that request in so that the election officials can process it, send you your ballot, and you can mail it back so it's received on time. I think that's probably the biggest concern, and I say that loosely, the question that we're hearing about how that process works.
And Marion, let's walk through this. Let's go through, let's say there's someone out there watching right now and they want to vote absentee. For whatever reason, they want to vote absentee. And they're just not sure. There's been all this stuff in there. Now there are a million places they can go to get information, but let's make this be the place right now. So if you have not voted, you're thinking about voting absentee, Marion, what do they need to know right now?
So the first thing you need to know is you have to apply for an absentee ballot by mail. And you can get that form online at govotetn.org. You have to have an excuse to vote by mail. Some of the common ones are that you're over 60, that you're going to be out of state, that you're ill, and this time having an underlying condition for COVID is considered ill, or you're a caretaker of somebody considered ill, or you live with them. And then there's some other ones too, but those are the main ones.
And so if an underlying condition for COVID, that could mean asthma, is that right? The Secretary of State refers you to the CDC website. So it's the common things that we've heard in the news, I think obesity, hypertension, autoimmune disease, asthma. I don't remember all of them, right, but they're the ones that are listed on the CDC website. And do you feel like it's easy to go? Is this when you say apply and when you say go to a website, I think people are like, oh boy, how have you done this? How easy is it?
I have done it. Yes, I have voted absentee, and I know my ballot is there. So first, I live in Davidson County. I went to the Davidson County Election Commission website. You can also go to the Secretary of State website. There was a form. I had to download it, fill it out, and I have to remind everyone, you must put your full Social Security number on it. It will not be accepted without that. That's just the law in Tennessee. And you sign it and you return it. Now you can scan it and email it back, or you can mail it back. They require what's called a wet signature, so it can't. Sometimes you can fill the form in online, but you have to print it and sign it, and then you can scan it back, or like I said, mail it. Then I got my ballot in the mail, and I filled out my ballot using, I don't remember if I used blue or black ink, but that's what you're supposed to do. And you fill in the circle for the person that you want to vote for in each of the races. Then I put it in a yellow affidavit ballot envelope. And I put it in there, and then this affidavit required my signature. So I had to sign that. If I didn't sign it, my ballot wouldn't be accepted. And then I put it in the return envelope they gave me and put a stamp on it and mailed it. And then I went to the GoVoteTN voter registration lookup to track that they got my ballot, and I know that they did.
All right, that's a good thing that they have. So you know that your ballot, you can track it. So that gives some comfort.
That's right. But I just have to double underline what Don said. If you know you want to vote by mail, get started on it now, because it's got to be mailed to you and you have to mail it back, and it must be received by November 3rd, Election Day. That's the law in Tennessee.
Right. And so, Don, let me ask you, I mean, do you feel like, so we're 2 weeks out. Do you feel like it would be okay to do it if you started working on it right now, or when do you think it's getting too late to start doing this?
Yeah, so the U.S. Postal Service recommends allowing, I think it's a week for a ballot to get through the mail. But to Marion's point, the election, you have to get your request application into the Election Commission, and then they need to mail you the ballot and you need to mail it back. And so we're probably getting close to that window, but technically you can still request an absentee ballot until the 27th. But the sooner the better. And I think when you said 2 weeks out, I hadn't realized we were that close. But yeah, it's getting to that close.
It's pretty crazy. We're that close. And well, Don, let me ask you this. Okay, so that's the mail-in side of it. And there's still time, and Marion's kind of gone over what you have to do. But let's say you're going to go and vote early. And I'll ask Marion the same question, but Don, I'll start with you. What are you hearing from people that are doing that all across the state? Are you hearing concerns? Are there things that are concerning you, or kind of what are you hearing from people that are going and standing in line and voting in person at this point?
Yeah, I'm not hearing any concerns. I'm hearing, actually just spoke to someone earlier today who voted in Cheatham County, and they mentioned, early voting generally is a good idea or not a good idea, a good opportunity to be able to go whenever you want. You can go to any of the locations in your county. You don't have to go to your specific polling precinct. And so it gives you, as a voter, more opportunity and more options to choose a time and a location to vote. So it's always been great like that. During the pandemic like this, it's even better, just given the sense that you can spread out voters across multiple locations, and again, sort of disperse those lines. And so you're not necessarily in a larger crowd, for all of the reasons that we're not doing that during the pandemic. So this person that voted in Cheatham County mentioned that, the line was socially distanced, and so it looked sort of long, but there were just spaces in between voters, and it moved rather quickly. The poll workers had gloves and I think gowns and face masks and maybe even the shields mentioned. So they're protected with the PPE. He mentioned the poll workers gave him a glove and a pen to use to sort of mark the ballot marking device, so he didn't have to touch the machine. It was just, that is sort of the story I'm hearing about people in-person voting. I myself haven't voted yet. I plan to do it later this week, but that is the consistent thing that I'm hearing, and that we're seeing in news reports also, is that the election officials have prepared in-person polling places so that they can do all of those things. There may be some plastic sneeze guards at the check-in tables. There's definitely PPE for poll workers, and just single-use pens or no-touch voting methods to kind of keep that sanitation and everything as clean as possible.
All right, so that's good. So you're hearing good things. I mean, you're hearing they're doing the things that they need to do to, in the midst of a pandemic. I am getting, and the station here is getting updates, I guess, tips, complaints, or whatever, that are filtered through another sort of nonpartisan media organization and all across the country. We're getting things from Tennessee, okay? And so I'm getting, tips from Knox County, not in our area, and from Dandridge and Shelby County and all over. And some of them are minor. They're things like people are wearing election paraphernalia, maybe a shirt or a hat while they vote, and that's not appropriate. And so there's a complaint. That's a legitimate complaint. They're not allowed to do that. Another complaint I'm seeing it in Knox County, I'm seeing it in a couple of places. It's just that the line is so long, and they're having to wait an hour. This person said 3 hours, and this was in Knox County, Are you concerned, and I'll ask you this, Marion, are you concerned about, it's great people are turning out, are you concerned about long waits, that kind of thing? What are you hearing?
Well, I'm hearing the lines are variable, and long waits in some places, in others not so much. I did hear, and I think this is a somewhat innovative idea. In Shelby County, they're going to start tweeting out where the lines are not as long. So if you're in a very long line, you can go somewhere. You can go somewhere else. I'd like to say one other thing about early voting, kind of a pitch, because one of the reasons it's good to early vote is if there's any kind of issue with your registration, you have some time to get it sorted out. If you've moved within your county, they can just take care of it right then and there. If you show up on election day and you've moved within the county, it's a real problem. You've got to go to a couple of different places. And I do have a friend and her husband who went to vote, and for whatever reason, there was some issue with his registration, but they now have some time to get that sorted out. If it's election day, you have a very compressed window. You've got 2 days after that, after you do a provisional ballot. So I just encourage people that have any kind of concern about their voter registration to show up at early voting so they have some time to get it resolved.
Okay, that makes sense. And Don, I'll ask you the same question about the time that people are waiting. And it's great. People are turning out. But when you hear people are waiting 2 or 3 hours, and again, that's an unverified, Knox County. I don't know if that's happening or not. But I'm hearing long waits here. Great, people are turning out. Are you concerned when you hear that people are waiting that kind of time? What does that say about our infrastructure for these kinds of elections?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'll agree with you that long lines, it's a good sign that people are excited to come out and vote and to participate. I think the lines are going to be a little bit longer because they're socially distanced, and so that adds sort of to the length and time that people are waiting, or the perception of the length of the line. I think two things, or one key thing to sort of think about standing in line and the length of time one is standing in line. It's one thing if we're having record turnout like we are, and a lot of voters are coming out to get their votes cast in person right now in the first few days of early voting, and so therefore it's a long line. It's another thing if it's a 3-hour wait because there aren't enough voting machines in the precinct, or the voting, there aren't enough poll workers, or some sort of problem. And I think that is the concern when lines are long because of those reasons. And if that is the case, generally that we'll hear about that being the reason. And so the fact that lines are long right now, I think is just indicative of the fact that people are excited to get out there and cast their ballots. When it starts to become a problem about infrastructure, that's when we need to be sort of concerned and to sort of think through how to address those problems in the moment if possible, but to consider preventing those problems in the future.
Generally thinking, how do you feel our infrastructure is? That's a good point. I mean, it maybe now at this point it is excitement, and that's good. Well, let's say we have just huge turnout on election day, and is our infrastructure ready for that kind of turnout? And Marion, I'll let you answer that.
Well, there's two kinds of infrastructure to count the votes. There's the machines that the voters vote on, and we should feel pretty confident of those. They've been used in, though some counties have new machines, they've all been used in the presidential preference primary in March and in August, and things worked as they should. So those voting machines we should have confidence in. Then the second infrastructure, if you will, is counting the absentee ballots. And we know already that we are going to have many times more absentee ballots than we have previously had, maybe 10 times more. I do think we have a process to count them. The process is going to be the same, even though there's way more ballots. It's a good process. I know that in the bigger counties, they've made efforts to scale up the number of counting teams. We just all need to be patient because it's important that every vote counts, that every voice counts. We want accuracy, not quickness.
And that brings me to another question. And Don, I guess I'll ask you this. So we've certainly heard, you indicated these ballots have to be in by election day in Tennessee. Do you know, Don, are they counting now? So let's say, Marion, you've already mailed yours in. There are a bunch of people that have already mailed theirs in. Are they counting that and it's kind of stored away somewhere, and then on election night they'll be able to just immediately, tell us the number? Or are they going to start counting from square one on election night when the polls close?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and that's something that needs to sort of be shared. So I think it varies from state to state in terms of the policies of when they can start counting those absentee ballots. But Tennessee is a state where, by law, election officials cannot start even counting those absentee ballots until polls open on election day. And so if they're getting tens of thousands of absentee ballots right now, they're safely stored in ballot boxes. They're not going to be opened until polls open on November 3rd. And so with the increase that we're expecting, already counties are reporting double what they've received total in 2016 at this point. So it's just going to take a lot longer, and it's helpful to understand that part of that is because they can't start until November 3rd. So that's a really good question.
So they can't start till polls open. So at 7 a.m. on election day, they can start counting this. Do you think we'll have so many? Will we be able to know? Do you expect, either Marion, I guess I'll ask you, do you expect that we would know that vote total when the polls close? Or is it going to be so much that they'll still be counting?
I'm sure they'll still be counting. We can go back to the August primary, and there was concern that it would be days before all the absentee ballots were counted, and that did not happen. I think almost every county reported by the end of the night, but it wasn't at 7 p.m. And to just expand a bit on what Don said, so people have faith and confidence in this, when my ballot arrived, I know that they checked my name against the rolls to say, yes, she asked for an absentee ballot. Then they compared my signature. Yes, this is her signature. So they've already checked me in. Like when you go to vote in person, you get checked in. So they do that, and they can do that before the election day. And then they put, now all the ballots that have been checked in are in this big box. And then once the teams start counting on election day, they are in a big room. I think Shelby County has a FedEx warehouse that they're using. And when you go in there to count, you can't leave until it's done. And there's no cell phones.
Oh,
and
wow.
There's poll watchers and there are people watching what's going on. There's always, I think there's 4 people per team. So it's a pretty careful process to make sure that everything is done on the up and up, and there's never it takes time, but they end up with accurate results.
And how is that? That's fascinating to me. How is that done? Is it done? They put Biden over here and Trump over here, or is it electronic? It kind of scans through.
It's electronic, but you have to open the ballot. So my understanding is, and they may vary a little bit by county, but they take 25 envelopes and they open them and take out the ballots, and then they count to make sure they have 25 ballots. They might only have 24 because one of the envelopes might have been empty. So then they have to record that. They have to physically examine the ballots to make sure they're suitable for the scanner. If you spilled coffee on it or something, it's not going to go through the scanner. Those are set aside and dealt with differently. But then once they've counted to make sure they have the same number of ballots as envelopes, or they can know why they don't, it goes in another stack, and then it goes through the scanner. So the counting itself is quick, just like a bubble test when you were in school.
Right.
But there's a lot of work to get the ballots ready to go through the scanner.
Fascinating. All right, we have Sharon on the line. I'm encouraging people to call in. And have you voted? Have you encountered? How has it gone for you? I guess let's go to Sharon here. Hello, Sharon.
I voted the first day because I didn't want to get caught up in some of these lines and other things. And I'm glad that I did that, because, certain people can't stand for hours. That's another thing. Now, if you're very fit, maybe younger, you can stand for hours and it won't matter. But some people would not be able to do that. So I was concerned that if I had to stand more than an hour, I would not be able to do it. So I went early. But the other thing I wanted to say is listening to your question about, Ben, to your guest, about how the process of counting the ballots was going to take place. I didn't thought of the fact that, well, who's going to be watching the counters? And I'm not talking about, say, the director of the precinct, because oftentimes, and you know, since 2000, we've had problems with our voting system and suppression. Well, it probably happened before then, but certainly 2000 was a big year because it went through the court system to determine who was going to be president. So, and because people are so partisan, you know, and we don't know if everyone who's over that system has integrity, who's going to be watching the counting and who's going to make sure that the votes are actually counted.
All right, that's great. Don, let me ask you that. I mean, that's important to everybody, that this process have integrity, that it's not some partisan person who's over watching this. I mean, how does it work and how comfortable are you with it?
Yeah, it is a very good question. There are some things that are written into Tennessee law that determines who participates in those absentee counting boards, who can be poll watchers, and it's written out that it has to be, to the extent possible, balanced between parties. And so there has to be both a Republican and a democratically appointed poll watcher at minimum. And then you also have outside groups like the League of Women Voters. Marion mentioned some poll watching and nonpartisan groups that also can apply to be poll watchers who can also be part of that experience to sort of provide that oversight that Sharon was talking about. And so I think the way that it's written into law and the practice that election administrators are going through right now and have gone through the past year in sort of recruiting poll workers, poll watchers, making sure that, you know, they are evenly divided amongst parties to the extent that it's possible, I trust that is being followed and that is going to be able to provide some sort of oversight. There will be people watching, I guess, is the bottom line. And so nothing sort of under the table is likely to happen with all of those eyes on it.
That's good. That's really good. And I want to give you the same shot at that question, Marion, because it obviously the undercurrent of what she's asking is, you know, who's going to be in the room and can we trust who's in the room when these votes are counted?
Well, specifically for absentee ballots, I believe that you can, and the counting teams are, I guess, bipartisan, Republican, Democrat, so that they're watching each other in addition to both parties can have an observer and civic organizations like the League can have an observer. So I'm pretty confident that things are well watched. We have to remember these are people, so, you know, might there be a mistake? Yeah, maybe. But in general, it's a pretty good process with lots of checks and balances. And we've not had problems with counting in Tennessee.
And you said the League will be out there. Will you be out there on that night? What are you going to be doing?
Personally, I'll be fielding other people's calls. But yes, the League has, we generally do have, for major elections like this, we have poll watchers that are out. Some might be in the absentee ballot rooms. Most will be in polling precincts. And we've done this over several elections. And that is what makes me feel confident in our process. We've not found any systemic issues, although sometimes, you know, people get flustered and might have a communication issue, and it's nice to be there to remind a voter they can get a provisional ballot. But in general, I think election officials want to do a good job. Most of them are voter-centric, and we have good systems in place.
All right, that's great.
We just need and let them work.
Let them work. Okay. All right, we're going to take a break and would love to hear your experience. Have you voted? How did it go? There are a lot of people who are voting, long lines, and it's good to see all of the turnout. But what are your thoughts at this point? We'll take a break. Come back with more right after this.